I heard the word provocation, so I'm feeling a little provocative.
Imagine Community was a 2-day event in July 2016.
So why are the structures in which we are putting identity and otherness not working?
We brought together and actively provoked a broad range of participants from the public and voluntary sectors. We asked them to question the conventional wisdoms around community.
And punk essentially means the rejection of dominant culture,
Provocations included: why is community relevant today? What's informing views on community? And why does it matter?
The Scottish Government has a huge number of policies which put community front and centre, but don't give any meat to that, any flesh on what are we talking about when we're talking about community.
So who are these communities, and what does community mean in the 21st century? How much do ideas of community of identity and place hold up? Lisa Peebles described some of the complexity of her experience.
And my mother was a 17-year-old single mum for the Gorbals. She was incredibly skilled at benefit fraud. And she understood that in order for me to have opportunities that were different from her, she was then going to have to, find that route through. The local MP at the time, who was a Labour MP, sent his daughters to a very, very posh school called Wellington. And my mother decided that if private schooling was good enough for him, it was going to be good enough for her lassie. And through by hook or by crook, she ended up sending me to a private school in Glasgow. And what that did was it created a bit of a monster, because it created a working class girl with a completely middle class sense of entitlement. And that's what's just driven me through. It's driven me through, and I find myself now occupying spaces and occupying roles that traditionally only for people like me.
John Fahan talks about the way his identification with very different communities has changed over his life.
I'm probably part of a few communities, where Petrolhead community being part of them. Like I said, I'm part of the learning disability community, and I'm kind of part of that because I feel more comfortable with it, because being part of the normal community is very hard for me to do.
What community is, I think, is just a thing that you arrive at through your differences, as opposed to something that you're just born into because of your cultural background or your class background.
Despite its importance, these comments show that identities are complex and always changing. So to what extent could and should community be founded on the politics of identity? Some participants reflect that connections through place are more valuable.
Particularly when the internet arrives, you no longer have to have place-based community. All you need is a pair of Gap khakis, and you're in a community of global hipsters. The problem was it wasn't real, and it was crucially disempowering. And this is the point. What we've managed to do is to take the power out of community.
While Robin emphasises the need for place-based empowerment, Lynn Sheridan suggests that communities should also provide a place of safety.
Community means a sense of belonging and being able to talk to other people who are like-minded folk, but also to be able to have a space, a safe space, where people can air their grievances or their disagreements.
While places have the potential to bring different people together, they can be divisive. John recollects his school years.
I spent half of my school years in a mainstream school, which was very difficult, simply because myself or James, we were not the fastest, kids in the class, and we were quite badly bullied because of that. Myself, I ended up having to come out of a mainstream school and go into a special needs school,
same with me as well,
which was better because we had smaller classes. But the big problem it has left me with is having trust issues.
Without doubt, identity and place generate community, but as John and James indicate, they also produce barriers and exclusions. Judy Weiss proposes Ubuntu, a non-Western approach to community which focuses on the collective good. She recounted a story of an anthropologist's encounter with African children.
he tasked them with going to get a bowl of fruit. And what he said was for them to run, and whoever got to the fruit first could have it for themselves. But what the children did was actually to form a group, walk to where the fruit was, and sit in a circle and then share it amongst themselves. So he observed them for a while and then asked them why they did that. And one of the children spoke up and said, Ubuntu, how can I be happy when all the rest are unhappy? So for me, that's where community comes from.
The current policy interest in community builds on a legacy of individualism, famously highlighted in Margaret Thatcher's statement, "There's no such thing as society." Given this context, is it possible or desirable to place the happiness of the many first? This also begs the question as to who might be included in this collective happiness. If there are limits, then how are the lines drawn, and might these become lines of conflict? The final provocations offer a response to these questions, built around not what is community, but instead how do you do community?
Community is a family of people working together and supporting each other. I would think that's my definition of community.
While community might mean family for some, this can create a divisive sense of ownership.
The problem with this way of thinking about community is it leads to what some people refer to as, and I'm going to use a term, multi-communitarianism. And it leads often to conflict between different communities. And so for me, if we're going to think about community in a way that's more open and inclusionary, we have to try to think about what we mean by our relationships with each other, the communal relations, which is an ideal, in terms of open and inclusiveness that's not proprietary.
Greg challenges an idea of community as identity owned by individuals, collective or place. But if not this, then what? Kevin Heggie uses the analogy of punk culture to suggest that community can be built on difference, not sameness.
The term punk seems like a ridiculous thing to be talking about in 2016, but I really try and reinforce using that word because for me punk isn't about sort of like a look or an image or something you can buy or sell. It's really about the way that you collect information and the way that you disseminate information. So that could be through like physical objects or really just the way that you determine your surroundings and the people that you're around. And punk essentially means the rejection of dominant culture, the rejection of patriarchal or dominant ideologies. And so that's where you get that diversity is people coming together, not necessarily based on sharing an idea, but the fact that you share solidarity with people that you support diversity and you show solidarity with people who are rejecting the dominant culture.
Kevin suggests a type of constructive rebellion, which Sarah Strang builds on as she talks about the need to reconsider terms.
So today for me was really inspiring. So many words like community, freedom, and poverty have been emptied out of their real meaning. Today meant that those words could be reclaimed and people had the opportunity to express their views, their values, and their beliefs about incredibly important words. Words that can change a society and words that can create progress.
Participants suggested that there is security in fixed ideas of community, but for some, the price of this security is division. Dario Gentili claims that community should be considered as a verb, not a noun. His idea of commoning proposes that community is something you do, not have.
It taught me that the question of community is not what it is. The question is rather how to do community, how to commoning, which is a common practice of decision, a shared political decision. This common practice must have no end. In this way, identity is not the starting point, it is the question, an always open question. This is what means commoning.
Commoning as something you do was expressed from perhaps an unlikely source, the Scottish Government, who decided that in order to make genuine connections with people, they had to work outside of defining lines. Karen Armstrong talks of the challenges involved.
The approach as well from a civil service perspective had no structure. We usually have project plans, we have timelines, we have a whole range of things to work for, and we kind of threw that out the window.
Community is a provocative term with many different responses. What's imperative is that this question of how we live together in a fast-changing world is asked and interpreted from diverse positions. It's this that will truly inform the making of bonds between people and their environments.
Community for me is just a simple fact of connectedness between me and other human beings, and that can mean a million different things.